With the sheer volume of Marvel and DC movies dominating the box office these days, you'd think that these comic book giants are giving us everything they've got. Well, you might be surprised to learn that there have actually been a ton of superhero flicks in the works that will never make it to the big screen, for one reason or another. From classic hero sequels to modern-day retellings, these films started out strong and then turned into cinematic urban legends when they were pulled from production. Even though we now have a Black Panther so good we couldn't imagine it having been done any other way, T'Challa and company were actually supposed to grace the silver screen all the way back in the 1990s. That's right. And in the title role, none other than Wesley Snipes, of course. Snipes spearheaded the project after it was brought up to him by Marvel. Snipes, of course, jumped at the chance to take on the role and bring Wakanda to audiences everywhere. He had even met with director John Singleton of Boys in the Hood, acclaimed to direct the movie, and the two were a promising combination. But as it often happens on Hollywood, money got in the way. Marvel declared bankruptcy in 1996, and the project was stalled. It's not all bad, though. If Black Panther hadn't fallen through, Snipes wouldn't have been able to star as Blade and change the face of vampire movies forever. Hopes were high for the Justice League movies, and while we do love Ben Affleck as Batman, Gal Gadot destroyed the box office as Wonder Woman, and Khal Drogo, Jason Momoa, has made a huge splash, as Aquaman on their own. The ensemble movies didn't quite live up to fan expectations. So it might sting a little to hear that there was an insane Justice League movie in the works once, that was shelved due to the 2008 writers' strike. Directed by none other than George Miller, entitled Justice League Mortal, could have been anything, based on the cast alone. Think Armie Hammer as Batman, Common as Green Lantern, the late Anton Yelchin as The Flash, model Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, and more. With George at the wheel, who knows how cool that movie could have been, and now we never will. When he's not breaking records diving into the deepest parts of the ocean in a terrifying little submarine, James Cameron is usually making big, splashy Hollywood movies. Which is why it's actually a pretty natural fit that he was once eyeing a superhero movie, and no, it was not Aquaman.
How'd you like to come play Aquaman for me?
It was actually Spider-Man, long before Sam Raimi came along with his trilogy. In the 1990s, Cameron was developing a Spidey flick that really messed around with the web-slinger's backstory. It sounds like a 90s dream with Arnold Schwarzenegger slated to play Doc Ock, and emerging heartthrob Leonardo DiCaprio eyeing Spider-Man. Things got a little weird, however, when the script apparently contained a ton of profanity and a love scene between Spider-Man and Mary Jane on top of a bridge. Batman has had a complicated history in movies. Some of his are groundbreaking and timeless, and some are, well, that one with George Clooney that everyone would really rather forget.
Never leave the cave without it.
After that whole debacle, everyone was anxious to revive Batman and put the whole thing behind him. That's when Batman Beyond came into the picture, and it sounds pretty awesome if you ask us. Instead of Bruce Wayne being the protagonist, this movie would follow Terry McGinnis, a teenager who joins forces with an older Bruce and eventually takes his place as the new Batman. The cartoon was a hit, but unfortunately the live-action adaptation never quite got off the ground, and eventually Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy would take its place.
I'm Batman.
Fantastic Four have had a bit of a hard time making their way to the big screen, but in 2005, Peyton Reed, the director behind Bring It On and Ant-Man, wanted to take a crack at the Fantastic Four. Unfortunately, he left the movie because of creative differences. See, Reed wanted to make a more wholesome comedy that differed from the usual superhero movie formula. Apparently, his movie met the Fantastic Four when they were already famous and beloved superheroes with celebrity status. And rather than the main focus being saving the world, it was all about their internal dynamics. It actually sounds kinda great. Lucky for us, we now have The Incredibles, which were able to achieve a similar idea and knock it out of the park. You know, with his history, it seemed like Joss Whedon really could have made one awesome Wonder Woman movie. And apparently, he thought so too. In 2006, a script of his for a possible Wonder Woman standalone movie was being seriously considered for production. The weirdest thing about this script, however, was the fact that he wanted to tell Wonder Woman's origin story from the perspective of Steve Trevor? That and some unnecessary anatomical details about the superhero herself in his script, which became available online, derailed his chances of bringing the story to life. We were rooting for you, Joss. We were all rooting for you. Long before Arrow was a popular TV show and all the way back in 2008, superhero movie writer extraordinaire David S. Goyer was developing a standalone movie called Green Arrow, Escape from Supermax. What was billed as a prison break thriller, Escape from Supermax would have launched Green Arrow, also known as Oliver Queen, onto the big screen and into Supermax, the notorious DC Universe prison for supervillains. Framed for a crime he didn't commit, the movie would have followed Green Arrow as he tried to break out, and apparently features cameos from all of our favorite DC bad guys, like the Joker, the Riddler, and Lex Luthor. Man, this is one movie we seriously hope comes back to life one day. We love when an otherwise obscure superhero is brought out of the woodwork and into the public eye. Why should Batman and Superman have all the fun? And fun is exactly how the 1990s Plastic Man movie sounded. Written by the Wachowskis in the height of their Matrix heyday, apparently the script was a totally out-there comedy, which could actually change a lot about the titular hero's origin story. Oddly enough, the movie seemed to simply disappear for a while until it came back to life in 2008 with the Wachowskis still at the helm. But now with the inclusion of Keanu Reeves set to star. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for unknown reasons, but if they ever do decide to bring it back, we are more than here for Plastic Man. Another slightly lesser-known superhero movie that never came to be was a standalone feature called Hawkman. While it seemed a bit random when the idea was first announced in 2011, and even more random now, the movie was set to be an origin story for the titular avian hero Hawkman, and a love story with, you guessed it, Hawkwoman. While the movie faded a bit into the background and hasn't been talked up since, the best thing about all of it is the original tagline from when Hawkman was first announced. The studio billed it as part Indiana Jones, part Da Vinci Code, and part Ghost. Now, if that doesn't raise a few feathers in anticipation, then we don't know what will, because that is quite literally the craziest thing we've ever heard. Sometimes a writer and director pairing comes along that sounds too good to be true, and that is the case with the combination of Guillermo del Toro and Neil Gaiman, who are working on an adaptation of Doctor Strange. Yeah, the Benedict Cumberbatch version is great and all that fun, but we can only imagine what these two could have come up with together. Weirdly enough, the movie never made it past the pitch phase, which Warner Brothers didn't express any interest in, because they're just out of their freaking minds. With Gaiman's attention to detail and sense of character, and Del Toro's visual mastery of dark and twisted sci-fi fairy tale horror, who knows what the pair could have concocted for their audiences? Perhaps it was too much of a good thing. The name Darren Aronofsky doesn't really bring up visions of superhero blockbusters, but it almost could have. Art house director and decided provocateur, Aronofsky almost made a Batman film, and it seems like it would have been a superhero movie like no other. The script was actually written by Frank Miller himself, and was supposed to be a shakeup of the entire Batman mythology. First of all, rather than a tortured billionaire, this Bruce Wayne was a homeless man who had never left Gotham. His friendship with a mechanic named Al would lead him to acquiring the Batmobile, and the Batcave was even a derelict subway tunnel. Of course, because it's Aronofsky, Catwoman was intended to be a dominatrix, and Commissioner Gordon was all kinds of depressed. All this could have been if Batman Begins hadn't taken its place, and we can't really decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The Amazing Spider-Man. Sony tried. They really tried to do justice to Peter Parker and the gang, but unfortunately never quite hit that mark. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 had every intention of setting up a ton of spin-offs and sequels in order to build a Spideyverse of its own, which we now know will never pan out. And of course, an Amazing Spider-Man 3 was in the works, and it sounded huge. All of the Sinister Six gang was set to make an appearance. According to rumors, the plot would center around Peter using his blood to bring back his loved ones from the dead. As if there was space for even one more character in that already stacked story. Speaking of the Sinister Six, back before Spidey joined up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there was a ton of buzz about this planned spin-off from the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Apparently, the six biggest baddies were going to get their own flick, in the same manner of movies like Suicide Squad. It was said to feature Doc Octopus, Kraven the Hunter, Electro, the Sandman, Vulture, and Mysterio. There was even a teaser for the movie hidden in the credits of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and we mean really hidden. But as Spider-Man didn't do quite as well as Sony had hoped, the original plan was scrapped. Don't lose hope though, as there are some rumblings that while it's not being actively developed, the Sinister Six could make an appearance sometime in the future. The idea of X-Men Origins is solid. Who doesn't want to see the gritty pasts of their favorite superheroes and how they came to be? While the first Wolverine didn't quite leave audiences thrilled, they definitely want us back with a spectacular Wolverine standalone Logan. But way back when, another origin story was supposed to be told, and that was the story of Magneto. That's right, detailing his survival of World War II and eventual realization of his powers. Sir Ian McKellen was even supposed to play his younger self using age-defying CGI, but the project fell through for the usual reasons: money and that dang writer's strike. If you know anything about superhero movies that might have been, you knew this one was coming. The now infamous Superman Lives will go down in history as one of the craziest movies ever, even if it never left the page. For those who might not know, we are so glad we get to break this news to you. In the late 1990s, Kevin Smith wrote an absolutely bananas Superman script at the behest of a producer named John Peters, who demanded that things like Superman fighting a giant spider, a sassy robot sidekick, Brainiac, who would at one point fight not just one but two polar bears, and a space dog. Originally pitched to director Robert Rodriguez, the project eventually fell into the hands of Tim Burton. We haven't even gotten to the best part, which is that the Man of Steel was supposed to be played by none other than Nicolas Cage. Man, do we wish we lived in the timeline where this movie made it to theaters. Well, if we could choose one superpower, it would be the ability to make some of these amazing sounding films come to life. What about you? Are there any on this list that you would just love to see? How about some that you think the world is better off without? Let us know in the comments, and we hope you enjoyed watching.